Okay, so we're ready to go with the 24th Emerging Centers track call for CARC. I'm Rich Knepper, one of the chairs of the track, and I just wanted to go over quickly a little bit about our organization. CARC is the Campus Research Computing Consortium, advancing the frontiers of research by improving the effectiveness of professionals, their career development and visibility, and their ability to deliver services and resources for researchers. There are a number of tracks in the People Network, including data facing, this track, the Emerging Centers, researcher facing, and systems facing. I encourage you to check out the CARC website and look into the different tracks, as well as the working groups that have particular foci that they look into. There's a lot of work getting done in our community, and we welcome anyone who wants to contribute, join up, and pull in. And so for this month, Kirk Anne from RIT is going to be discussing levels of support and staffing. Kirk, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and you can take it away.
All right.
And I'm going to put the call doc into chat.
All right. Hope everybody can see the slide. So.
Not yet. No.
No slide yet.
No slide? Oh, yes, I actually have to hit this share thing. Dang it. I clicked on it, it should share. There we go. How about that? So everybody can see it now? All right, cool.
Good.
So I'm riffing off of a working group paper that I participated in back in 2017, talking about building capacity for digital humanities. And it's sort of, as we were talking about this, it like, oh yeah, we did some of that. And there are a number of similarities to the work that we did in supporting research, computing, and data in general. Digital humanities is sort of a specific niche. So I'm going to talk a little bit and summarize some of the paper in basically doing an environmental scan and needs assessment, some of the organizational models that we came up with, and degrees of capacity. And then afterwards, we'll show the survey data that we got. So basically, what we started with is, if you're looking to build capacity for digital humanities or RCD, starting off with an environmental scan and needs assessment. What's needed for your institution and researchers? And at this point, for me at RIT, we're looking at that of, I can't supply research computing for every discipline on the planet. Which ones are going to make the best bang for the buck kind of thing? Where should I be focusing my people's efforts? So to that, another one is, how are other institutions handling those needs? And I think we're all sitting here in this meeting sort of using this as that opportunity. How are others, trying to figure out how to get through these things? And then what talents and support do you have available? They may not necessarily be under your group. They may be in a researcher's lab or in a different college, or in a couple of different ways. So this is one of the things that we looked at, of doing that scan of the world to see where we're at. We came across basically 4 organizational models as we were looking at it. How do people support these kinds of things? And we're a combination between centralized and hub and spoke, where a centralized service model basically says, okay, we're going to put all of the effort in one place. That way everybody has one door to knock on. It will have a better awareness of initiatives and needs, cohesion of training offerings and support offerings, and that will allow us to coordinate a little easier with external efforts. However, this being, the ideal situation or not, depending, this is a organizational model. Ours is probably more like a hub and spoke model, where we're trying to create a central node that links to other support centers. Some of the colleges have better support for their needs. So for example, a genomics group may have a specialist in their realm. We have our Center for Computational and Relativistic Gravitation. They're doing their black hole simulations, and they have their own cluster and their own people doing their stuff. So to that, it's probably how most of us get going, where the growth happens organically, where people need to be, the expertise and support is developed where it's needed, but we want to make connections back. Probably the more normal way is the mesh network model, where no support unit is dominant. Everybody's sort of floating out there in the ocean, doing what they're doing. There's a little less cohesion across the other models, and needs are met more locally, but it also may mean that we are not getting optimization that would help at an institutional level. So everybody's sort of doing their own parts where they're doing it. And then probably the last model, which is the consortial model, where, well, we're all going to sort of float on our own boats, and we're doing our best efforts through contacts, very loosely connected, where the mesh model may have stronger connections between two things. It's sort of like everybody's on their own boat. So those are sort of the four models that we looked at. We looked at capacity. So most of us started off with the early stage. Somebody got interested. We're going to do our best effort to support you. You're probably going to get some unnecessary and unhelpful redundancy. And to move out of the early stage, you need to raise awareness on the benefits and opportunities to build a critical mass to get more supported. So to that, we're looking at, the one person army, or a couple of people who are trying to get things going. That's a place to be. The next stage up is sort of that established stage. We've realized, oh, we need to get some things done. We get to a little more of a supported role, whether it's a department, college, or institution. Establish some more formal arrangements of support, like, oh, we have this person who's hired to do this versus somebody who's doing it via best effort. And then to move from the established stage to a high capacity stage, looking for those steps of sustainability and advisory committees to get, the power and the political clout to move forward. And where we hope to be at someday is a high capacity stage where we're fully funded, fully supported, and sustainable. We're able to provide the appropriate support of institutional needs. We have the governance and covering to make sure that we're always going to be around. So those are the three stages that we came across. So on to our survey results. So we had 15 people respond, and somebody's lucky enough to have 20 people on their team. And we have a sort of sprinkling in that sort of asymmetrical lump, where most people are in the 6 and under, 7 and under. A lot of the one-person teams. So on the average of hours, Many of us are spending about half time. What I did get a chance to do with our short thing was to look at the size of the team with respect to that. What's the percentage? So we have a lot of people sitting in the, half 20 hours, a couple at 40 hours, couple at 80 hours, 3 FTE, so 120 hours. So that's one of our looking at researcher. When it comes to systems, we have a few with no support. And the systems administration seems to be the one picking up more hours in the support. And that's usually a case of, like, if you're a one-person army or a small team, it's probably keeping the cluster up and running is first game, right? First thing to do. Software. This is one where a lot of us are probably looking at a lot less time trying to get things going. So 3 people with 5 hours, a couple of people with 15 to 20 hours, few in the higher end capability. But this is probably also one of those where it's challenging for both the researchers and RCD providers of getting that software built and up and running. So you may have a very limited menu of things and building where you can. Data-oriented support, about 10 hours seems to be the prevailing wind on this one. Quarter time, which if I remember right, that was a person who had only one person, so probably back to that 10 hours a week capability. So not quite focused heavy on the data yet. Now, as some of the regulations and rulings and solicitations may change, but that's sort of what we're looking at there. In strategy, one team has 120 hours, which, oh my God, but that's probably the big 20-person team also. But most of us are sitting about 10 hours-ish, a little more, a little less here and there. So that's sort of a good thing of, looking at the communications and budgeting and planning. The hours per week on doing security-oriented support. A number of us are not spending a lot of time, 5 hours a week, which sort of indicates to me we haven't seen a big swell of these things yet, but I do anticipate it's probably going to change a little bit. Or we're just very efficient at doing that compliance and auditing and all that. Probably not. Yeah, we're audit, we're compliant, we're fine. But that's one where we might need to look at. So if the great HR gods were to hand us a new position, where would we put our effort? A number of people were sort of waiting towards either system administration or researcher facing support. And I'll have to, I did this as words, so I gotta rearrange this to get us a little better numbers, but it looks like it's mostly researcher facing. And to that, that's the position that I was granted by the HR gods. My hire is going to be in research facilitation. If you're lucky enough to get a second position, God, if the budget opened up, looks like we're still in the researcher facilitation, but now we're opening up into application and software development, which is about where I would be going for my next round, would be somebody helping to do that. But we're sort of all over the map with respect to that. But I think this is a good piece to sort of see what would our next stage be. And then finally, the question we asked was, what would you consider in growing your team? What kinds of things? And it turns to mostly how could we help our clients do more work, communications and organizing our space to make the best team. So yeah, all right. So there we go. That's my discussion. So what would we like to talk about? What are people thinking here? Was it helpful? No, this is a blitzkrieg through the data.
Since there's silence, I'm curious, can you go back to the organizational models?
Sure.
So I'm not exactly sure where that came from, but so like with that's fine. So when you these are like great, little graphics to explain, the concepts, right? I get that. But like, I mean, has anybody thought about like, and this I'm trying to do with my own like collaborations, like quantifying these models? So, putting the ticket counts and, tickets responded to in the outer bubbles of the mesh network model, or, some kind of way of seeing, even having people's names in those nodes and leadership and stuff like that to kind of, do people do that formally so they can see it?
So from the white paper, the working group that we did, it was basically focused on digital humanities. So we were looking at how do different institutions handle these things. If in the paper, there's a little more detail of sort of the evolution and examples of these things. And I did want to put it into this presentation to muddy it up. I was sort of extracting and generalizing some of these things. But to your point, that's an interesting question of how many different implementations of the models are there. I would think that it's probably going to be more hub and spoke or mesh than it would be centralized. Only because centralized is sort of that very difficult one. If you would have to have like a full-on research center to do that delivery. UB might be in that realm, maybe. So this is an interesting question we could look at to how would that be delivered, and who's leveraging those kinds of things. But yeah, I think some of the metrics of how do these models work in our sort of work in the working group was, these are the models that we've identified. Maybe we should go back and actually review them and sort of take a shot at them. Claire.
Thanks, Kurt. This is really interesting. I'm curious to know, does everyone rely on ticketing in this group? We don't. And so Alex's question is interesting because we actually try not to hide behind their tickets, and we want, we grow the relationship. And so I'm wondering how other folks handle metrics and that kind of thing, building off of Alex's question.
Well, I've been trying to do it under the hood because our ticketing is problematic. And in evaluating these models, so in a mesh or hub and spoke, if I have somebody who's answering emails in the genomics lab, I have absolutely no view into that. And so one of the metrics I'm using is sort of like project creation and user addition to sort of model out those. But I think in a support angle, yeah, these are ones that are trying to find under the hood. So this is where in next iterations probably will be faculty surveys and graduate student surveys to say, where are you getting your support? What are you not getting, those kinds of things. Because especially in mesh and consortial, there's no real communication. It's sort of this, ad hoc theory. So, but in the central, where like in a small institution and you are the, RCD person, how many emails are you getting? How many calls are you getting? But this is one that I think in an RCD world, how can we do a good metric of that? I was thinking in the capacities model, to help sort of level set across the institutions would be, what kind of user facing survey could we add to say, here are our metrics that come in to say, how much system security plans are you doing or whatever. Another angle of metric may be via the sponsored research support people, the VPR in their office, of how many grants are coming in and how many are putting computational components into their space, and trying to find those buckets. And right now we're down a few people in our sponsored research. So I'm having a challenge trying to catch up with all the data and metrics, because they're just going like, no, we're just processing grant proposals. So that's another angle to maybe look at of, can we do it by just straight up grant allocations? But the other thing that we're looking at is, when I was brought on to RIT, we're like, oh, sponsored research only gets access. But then we're like, well, but we want to move to an R1, which means we need to get our doctoral students access, and they don't have funding per se. So now we've moved down the chunk to unsponsored research, or we have tenure faculty who are looking to get grants, which means they need to run pilot projects. So now we're moving on the spectrum of what are those things. So I'd be interested in finding out from others what might be a good way to capture some of this data. And what I'm also looking for is the easy capture, because we can always get the list of grants that have been applied for and then attach those to projects that we've put on the cluster. That's a relatively easy one that doesn't require a lot of work from anybody other than me to collate that data. So, yeah. Bob.
Hi, Kirk. Thank you. I also want to thank you. It's interesting to look at some of the survey data and to hear you talk about this. I'm curious, one of this, thinking about my own situation where although we're in the context of larger Harvard, we do have our own research computing group, mostly focused towards assisting faculty, but and we do have our own hardware. So we've really been partnering with other groups outside of research computing to assist with the support. And I'm wondering if you might comment about that, or if any of the discussions, the survey data has really commented on that as well.
Yeah, we didn't really capture that in the survey per se, but I think that sort of ties to the mesh network model of the loosely connected groups that we count on, and what our team affectionately calls the Illuminati, the IT Illuminati, right? Of, we know the secret handshake and this is how we go together. So one possibility is to actually document that mesh network. And how are so I'm meeting with our library. We don't support some of the DH tools. They do. They are doing the digital scholarship where we have some overlap. So where does that overlap go? And so in assisting our clientele, where are the services? So we have a full-on film production studio, whole building of this stuff for rendering and doing animation, and they're brilliant at that. Have we done computation fluid dynamics and some of the flow analysis in a video thing? No. we have the capability, but have we made that linkage and have we made that outreach? And so this is one where since I'm sort of the centrally funded research computing, do I act as the hub for the spokes to start making those connections? Or do we just realize, group A is going to talk to group B, and, group B is going to talk to C, D, and E, does it turn into a bash or just a crazy graph of those things? So I think this is one where, in realizing that model, how do we embrace it? How do we support it? Also, how do we orchestrate it? Because I think one of the things that I'm focusing on in my emerging center is, can I be the aggregator because since I report to the vice president of finance and administration and has the purse strings, I can probably ask for the $500,000 worth of GPU cards, whereas no other department on campus can. So I look at it as, in the budgetary requests, trying to be that hub to the spokes, but realizing that it's probably going to be more mesh in the realm. So yeah, this is one where it's like, maybe we should tinker with this this concept a little more and see how this plays out.
Thank you.
So there's silence again. I'm so fascinated by this. This is why if you have an organization that's a mesh network model, and that's this, I guess those nodes are supposed to be like, they're doing RCD stuff, right? Or maybe even enterprise stuff or whatever. But there's also like a whole other network outside of that of faculty doing RCD stuff like I do. And I've always felt like a black sheep, a lone wolf, an annoying loser, all sorts of different labels I give myself. But like linking that up, there's all this like stuff, because I teach people how to onboard. I do all this stuff, and then I'm not part of the research computing model at Clemson, whatever that might be, right?
Yeah.
But like, it just seems like there's all this like these helpers out there that could help fuel.
Right. Well, and there's realization of like, as a central person, I can't necessarily get, right down to the particular models the lab is using. So how can we leverage the faculty who are leading the projects, or the graduate students who are making the great bounds? And so I think part of this is actually that enhancing the communication is, how do we find the nodes on the mesh? How do we create those linkages? And that's a consortial model of, okay, there are a bunch of clouds of support all over the place. And one of the things that I've talked to the deans and my advisory board is, I liken myself as to the social butterfly who's going back and forth and saying, hey, the computational linguists in linguistics should really talk to the computational linguistics specialists in computer science. And some of these groups have never talked to each other. When I was at Geneseo, a biologist came up to me and said, I need to count the ends of these chromosomes in this slide. I've dyed them, and here are a whole bunch of dots. I need to count the dots. I looked at it and said, well, that's a galaxy, and astronomers have been doing that for decades. And I put the astronomer and biologist together. They were sort of tenure track faculty, sort of at the same point. And like, here's a project that this person has the solution, this person has the problem, let's put them together. And that's where I think, as an RCD professional, in sort of that hub and spoke thing, is how do I start getting these people connected, not necessarily in a, you have to go through me, but enhancing the mesh to make those connections. And I think that's one at a institutional level. How can we, enhance the message? Is, if everybody's saying we need GPUs, well, how do we afford that? How do we deliver that? We don't want to necessarily have everybody buying them up willy-nilly and not optimizing them because they only use them for like 2 months of the year, and then 10 months they're not being used at all. That's not effective. So how can we orchestrate some of these things and organize these things? So yeah, to your point, I think it's how do we facilitate those things? How can we create the user groups or the communities? And I think this is where Kirk is that brilliant example of, bring people together with all kinds of, crazy ideas and experiences and use cases. What's similar? What's different? How can we use it in our space to make that happen? So
Maybe
Right.
you could have adjunct professors in the IT department.
yeah, absolutely. Well, I was actually looking at, can I fund graduate students? Like, I will fund you a graduate student, but they're going to be your first, level 1 support to the cluster. Is they're going to help me help you because they know your domain way better than I ever will. But I'll train them on how to do the IT side of the fence. So those kinds of options, what can we leverage? What can we, because we all know budget is always that pain. And I think if we can facilitate some of the sharing capability, and I think that's where like this community is ideal in that, sharing the information. Are we on the right track? Has somebody figured out how to do this better than I have? Or, well, if we just change this, look at that. It helps so many more. Like taking a digital humanities capacity and saying, well, let's flip it on its ear a little bit, asking the same thing. We have people who want to do stuff with data, with digital stuff. So, yeah. Reading through the chat here to see if we have anything.
Claire, I can try to answer your question. Sorry, I'm eating lunch, so I'm off camera. I was typing, but since it's silence, I can speak up. Yeah, so I'm at NC State, and I know some of you, but not all of you. And I am actually based within the libraries, and we're working on creating a new research facilitation service, is what we're calling it. And we have staff both in libraries and within our research computing and central IT. And we already have, our central IT has a lot of research computing staff and support already that are spread throughout different units within their organization. And there hasn't been a whole lot of easy access to those services from a researcher and campus perspective. And so our group was it's been spun up to sort of help figure out what exists on campus and then provide sort of a layer for researchers to come to in order to get to those services and document needs that are being asked that we can't find a service provider either locally or in a community resource. And so we are pretty new. We started from a task force 2 years ago. And so that's sort of our status. And so we have spent at least the last 12 months, probably longer, trying to basically catalog what exists on campus. So that goes to your question, Claire. We started with what we knew as a group. Our task force was spread from Office of Research, departmental IT groups, libraries, our data science academy, central IT. And we just started talking about what we already knew. And then we went to basically the local resources. So we started with our central IT and started, asking our CIO and down, like, what do you know exists? And we started talking with those groups and we would meet with them each time. There's a lot of overlap. So, it's not as clean cut as like, hey, let's talk about X service, but really trying to map out and document what exists and where. And then we moved to the libraries, who do a lot of data support. We moved to Data Science Academy. And then in order to learn more about what's happening in the colleges, we are working, our plan right now is to start with one college, which is the College of Sciences, and to roll out college by college. So we are kind of in this stage where I don't have a lot of great information for you, and I expect a lot of hiccups, but we're going to be kind of opening for business for the College of Science affiliated researchers. And so we're going to try to, work with their departmental IT and ROIT to answer their questions. We are using a ticketing system, ServiceNow. We don't want to be really, so we want to hide that as much as possible, but we know in order to communicate and collaborate with the other service providers and shuffle people around, that it's probably just going to be a necessary evil, is how we feel about it. So I don't know, but that's all I can think to share, but I'm happy to answer any other questions.
I think my biggest concern is that I am missing the folks like Alex, the ones who are kind of buried in a discipline, solving problems, and having a great effect, but in not a big overt way. So I feel like it lands on the shoulders of me and my team to ferret out all of these people and these services that they're making really good progress and they're really effective. And I'm just curious, how people are doing it, because we've not found that like service catalogs, and definitely the service now that we use for transactional stuff is definitely not effective when we're trying to make relationships and grow the RCD support of researchers. It just hasn't been effective on my campus.
I was going to say,
Come back.
That's a new Zoom feature I haven't heard before.
Yeah.
I think
The beatbox
Bob
version.
was having some problems.
Okay, it wasn't just me then.
Yeah, I was thinking Max Headroom, but I couldn't forget I forgot the name, so that's good.
Oh. Weird.
Claire, I'd say that I've been trying to beat the bushes for the 8 years I've been director through every avenue possible. And there's still groups that don't know we exist, that they can get computing time for free and all this other stuff. And Alex would probably agree with me when I say this. We as researchers think we know everything, so we don't actually need help from anybody. And so we'll actually do things wrong and build our own devices when we should really be using the centralized expertise. But many of us researchers have been burned because we went to different IT units on campus, like Central or the hospital. And then they're like, oh yeah, we could do that. That'll be $1 million. And we're like, no, thank you.
Yeah. I think the political issue of burnt bridges is one of the challenges too of, and to that, I sort of think of the coalition of the willing, right? Is to Alex's point, feed them and they will come. And we have to get through the COVID world of that. So one of the things, I think there's grassroots options, and the sort of methodology I'm thinking about is doing also a top-down solution, because our faculty senate on research and scholarship threw up a flare that, oh, research computing, we're not getting all we need. And in reality, it was actually they needed to have a printer hooked up, and they didn't get a good answer from the central IT folk. So I'm thinking of a pincer movement of going by way of sort of visiting departments and research labs, but also coming down via the deans and saying, okay, we have our services. Who would you like us to talk to? Because I think there'll be the people who are, looking for everything possible. The people who are like, no, I like my server under my desk. It keeps me warm and furry. So we have to work on that spectrum also of we can only do so much. But I think one of the things that we hit recently is that the College of Liberal Arts at RIT was like, oh, we don't have any support. It's like, I sent you email and you were trying to hijack me 2 years ago. And, so it's always that communication of, nobody ever reads their email. And if they do, it's like, no, that's not for me. So I think it is beating the woods and sort of getting out there with multi-pronged communication efforts. I think the other thing is to provide that excellent service that we know we can deliver, because that's how we're sort of picking up people is, well, we have 100 A100s. How many do you have? Well, come on over. We've got them. Come on over. And that's the thing is to work with the finance parts of, here, let's get the coalition to say, oh, we need a bigger cluster here.
Kirk needs a research, I'm sorry, an IT facing track.
I
mean,
with or without the pitchforks.
Well, if you say that, then nobody will come.
Or they'll line up with the torches. See, the nice thing is I'm housed within our central IT group, a wholly owned subsidiary. So I get to work from inside and say, no, we need to do this. But that might be another actual model that we need to look at is like IT support kind of thing. Are you a wholly owned subsidiary, a completely isolated, a co-managed kind of space? Because on our reboot, the original research computing reported to the vice president of research. And so they were doing a lot of the black market server support and wheeling and dealing in the back rooms with all the things. And that got central IT quite peeved. And of course, research like, well, we're going to be stealing. So why don't you report to the central IT folks and then you can sort things out. And so, yeah, that might be another survey we should do, right? Is where does the effort land? Is it, piecemeal, because you know how to run machines, you run your own, or, is there a nice central model that, is wonderful and benevolent dictator, or, yeah, those types of support models. So, any other comments, thoughts, trials and tribulations?
Well, this has been a really great discussion. And thanks to everyone who's contributed and folks who have listened in. And the chat's been really lively. So we really appreciate that. And also, Kirk, thank you very much for facilitating this. We've had the good fortune to bring on a number of folks to emerging centers as part of our steering committee, Alex and Kirk among them. And if you're interested in contributing to that, you can certainly email myself or Jane and let us know. We'd be happy to expand that circle. So this has been really great. We'll get the video up before too long and circulate that to the rest of the track. And thanks everyone for contributing.
Yeah. And if you Google building capacity for digital humanities, you should find the ECAR working group paper. It might be useful to browse through. We also talked a little bit about funding structures and roles in supporting digital humanities, which I think can expand to the general research, computing, and data realm.
And that paper includes the organizational models as well, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I thought so. Okay. All right, great, folks. If you have, the other thing I wanted to bring up, if you've got topics, make sure to send them our way. I think our next, by vote in the last survey we did, our next topic is going to be training and workforce development, recruiting, how to get and grow a diverse pool of candidates, how to share and let people know about what's going on. So we have a number of topics there. If anyone is interested in helping facilitate that, please let us know. We'd love to have an additional facilitator for that. All right, thanks everyone. We'll see you again soon.
Have a good one. Bye.
Best wishes.